be happy with who you are. Don't follow the crowd of the masses. Be yourself and you'll be okay. Just be happy with who you are. Just be happy with who you are. Just be happy with who you are. Just be happy with who you are.
Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with your charismatic host and prominent safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Be entertained and informed as the Safety Doc discusses both best and bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. The truth will keep you safe. Follow Dr. Perrodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD.
This is Dr. David Perrodin, and I want to thank you as we begin another journey into school and community safety. If you're looking for industrial safety expert, Appalachian State University professor Dr. Timothy Ludwig, please visit www.safety-doc.com. Again, that's Dr. Timothy Ludwig at www.safety-doc.com. Hi, everybody. This is David, and welcome to another episode of the Safety Doc Podcast, episode 63, with our guest, TJ Martinell. A thank you to John Grant and the 405 Media for airing the Safety Doc Podcast, 2 p.m. PST daily on the 405media.com out of Los Angeles, California. You can find blog posts, responses, anything you want, just visit the 405. Of course, the show is on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean. Hey, you look for it, you'll find it. Thank you so much for following and supporting the Safety Doc Podcast. So I was going through the Harvard Business Review, and I've mentioned before on the show that I like to pull some of the research summaries that they do, kind of a meta-analysis, which means they take different research studies and kind of boil them down into a conclusion or more of a summary statement. And they do a great job of that, the Harvard Business Review. Recently did a piece about rituals and how rituals add value to our lives, how they add value to things. And recently, I've also become a listener of TJ Martinell, who now has released, I believe, TJ, your 10th podcast. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And I've really appreciated his perspective. And as we get into this, the show is about focusing on TJ. But TJ has some very special rituals. And also, I think TJ brings to us a perspective of somebody with much wisdom for his age. And, I guess not to categorize you, TJ, as a millennial, but somebody who has followed in the footsteps of advice of someone like Aaron Clary, who we both know in reconnaissance, in understanding, exploring your world, then finding your own way and making decisions. And before we get into this, one of the things that it just still resonates with me from one of your podcasts, you talked about where there was an unexpected snow. So you got your snow gear and you went out with your snowshoes, and instead of going on the trail, because obviously the trail goes through the trees and the snow doesn't get down to the ground, stays up in the trees, so the trail quickly gets trampled down and there isn't a lot of snow. You went off that and you went up the side of I guess this mountain or hill, which didn't have trees, and you made your own path. And I think that resonates through all of your work, that you make your own path. And you choose the path which is going to probably be more, I would say, more difficult, and it's also going to have more discovery, and it's going to reveal more to you, and it's also going to give you more opportunity for introspection. So with that, I am glad to introduce TJ Martinell. And TJ, please tell us about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, David. Like you said, my name is TJ Martinell. I'm an author, writer, and reporter from Washington State. I'm a native Washingtonian, unlike a lot of the people who are moving up here recently. And I've been in journalism since I was in high school, and I've been writing for different newspapers for the Puget Sound area. Now I work for an online news site that covers Washington State industry. I'm also the author of a couple books that are available on Amazon, The Stringers and the Informers. And then I also do just a lot of stuff on the side as a writer. I work, or I volunteer with the 10th Amendment Center, which is a constitutional think tank based in Los Angeles, and I've worked with them for about, I believe, since 2014. But as you were mentioning on the hike that I took a couple weeks ago when there was that surprise snowfall, it is a good analogy because it went dead straight up that ridge, and so I actually had to stop a few times. I'm in pretty good shape. I lift almost daily, but it was still very difficult because there was no switchbacks for you to go up through. And so it was more difficult, but the reward was that I got a view that I think very few people who go on that snowshoe trail ever get to see. And so that, and there was not a whole lot of other people there. I think that's one thing with the lifestyle, is that you're also going to end up doing a lot of things on your own because it's not going to fit. And it's not an issue of being right and wrong. It's more of what's best for you, and it may not be best for everybody else. So you got to make a decision about whether something is good for you and then do it, even if other people are not going to be coming with you on whatever journey that is. It's not, like you said, it's not the easy path, but it's, I think, more fulfilling and satisfying than doing what's easy in the long term.
You've read some of Aaron Clarey's work, and Aaron Clarey can be found at captaincapitalism.blogspot.com, and I just want to bring that up because one of the books that he wrote was Reconnaissance Man. Also wrote a book on fiscal planning, more of a common sense type approach, Poor Richard's Retirement. I guess when you talk, I also hear some words of Aaron resonate because Aaron hikes a lot and he has a podcast, and I know that you follow Aaron. I also listen to his podcast. And I think one point I'm going to bring up is most of the people that probably went and did the snowshoeing that day, it never crossed their mind to consider a different option. It was just, here's the path and it's laid out. And I remember one thing that Aaron talked about in his book, Reconnaissance Man. Have you read that one, TJ?
I didn't get the chance to read Reconnaissance Man. I've read Poor Richard's Retirement and did a review on that. So in Reconnaissance Man,
Aaron talks about if you're 18, 19, 20, go out and experience the world. And you've actually done a lot of that. I was reading your post about a pilgrimage to the British Isles, up England, Scotland, Ireland. I actually went to the website of that pub you took a picture of, which was it Ye Old? It is phenomenal. But yeah, the photography, what you've shared is outstanding. But what Aaron had shared though is, he said, I could easily write itineraries for people to follow, but they need to discover on their own. There's some guidelines and here's how to basically live, inexpensively, like to live out of your car or something like that. But he said, I'm not going to give an itinerary because everybody has to discover that for themselves. And I thought that's really brilliant, because what do we find in bookstores, online, and all of that? It's like, here's your trip, plan this, follow this. Well, that might have worked for that person and they had a certain, meaning that they pulled from it, but that doesn't mean that's going to resonate with you. It's not going to have the same meaning. And also, like Aaron had said, try things out and then you'll know if you like them or not. And then the next time go through and the things that you like, build upon those. So, TJ, let's go into, it's tjmartinell.com as your website.
Yeah.
So what can we find off of, and I'll also post this out, but it's TJ and it's all one word, Martinell, MARTINELL.com. What can we find on your website?
So what you'll find links to my podcast. There's the RSS feed. There's also going to be links to my books that you can buy on Amazon. And then I've written a few essays. I've done so infrequently because I'm doing so much other writing for other sites. Right. There's going to be a page that'll be dedicated to some of my journalism work, and then there's going to be another page dedicated to issues that I've written about concerning the Constitution and kind of American history and liberty and issues like that. And then I've also got a little bit of a biography. I'm planning to actually drop a new essay that's based on some of the values. You were mentioning my wood burning. I've been doing that as part of this effort to have my home reflect my values. And people are always talking about what they want to see in their society and community around them. Well, they need to start with their own home. And so that'll have some of the photos of the woodwork that I've done, and then other pick photos that I've taken. You can also, they'll have links to my social media stuff like Instagram, Twitter, and my Facebook page.
So your two books, and The Stringers and also The Informers. Okay. Mm-hmm. Tell us about the books, and I want to build upon that because I'm very intrigued.
So The Stringers was conceived when I used to have a 20-mile commute every day from work when I was a young reporter, and I was thinking of ways to come up with a better business model for newspapers. How is a way that they could, because this as newspaper industry has been declining, and that certainly hasn't changed since 2012. And I finally just said, well, what if they just banned them? Then maybe people would read them.
Right.
And then that question led me down to this sort of Orwellian dystopia where you have a prohibition era, except instead of alcohol, the contraband is information.
Awesome.
And
wow.
what if the bootleggers, instead of smuggling liquor, were smuggling information via newspapers? And it was also, I started writing it at the time when the Edward Snowden revelations came about. And so I was thinking, well, what if people went off the internet completely just to get away from government surveillance and to obtain some sort of form of control over their life? I can't remember where I found it, but after Edward Snowden's whole revelation, I think the Kremlin was ordering typewriters to start having physical copies of documents, because the guy walked out with I think it was a thumb drive with gigabytes of data.
Right.
If that had all been physically printed out, he wouldn't have been able to do it. So this return to a retroactive era, I thought was really intriguing. I also loved the 1930s, but I was told that you got to write for a modern audience. Well, what do? You put the past in the future, so to speak. So the book is set in a post-earthquake Seattle, where Seattle has been destroyed by an earthquake, and you have these newspaper gangs running the city, and it follows this young reporter, and in the era, all professional legitimate journalism jobs are licensed, like a doctor or a lawyer. So you've got to pass their version of the bar. You have to adhere to all these different standards. And so you can't be a reporter without a license. And that whole just brings up all these questions that we hear now when they're talking about, the First Amendment, the fake news debate, right, censorship, and sites deplatforming people. And then the sequel, of course, follows this young reporter, and it's him trying to, it's a story that really is down to him trying to find his dad and find out more about him, because he has this whole past that he discovers throughout the book. And so there's the personal, but there's also the external situation that he's found himself in. So, but I wrote that in 2013, and what I've had people tell me since the 2016 election was that it anticipated a lot of the stuff that we're seeing today.
Amazing.
Which was, yeah. So not always the same. Here's an example that I'll give. There was a plan by the FCC to put their agents, I guess, or whatever you would say,
right,
in different newsrooms to monitor how they determine what news that they run. That is exactly what happens in my book. You have a government censor agent in every single newsroom who his approval is required for the publication of any story. So the FCC chairman at the time was calling this out because he thought it was a horrible idea. Well, that's exactly what I put in my book.
Wow.
So I thought it was, yeah.
Wow. So TJ, you also have another book close to release, right?
Yeah, it's a book called Men Who Walk Alone, and this was set in the 1930s, and it's a bit of a pulp noir, a gritty, sort of story. A little bit is typically a familiar plot line. It's the one good cop in a bad town who's dealing with vigilantism. Ironically enough, there's that movie Death Wish that's coming out, the remake. I have the original 1974 film starring Charles Bronson, and that I had just seen that when I was working on this story. And so it does try to deal with the same themes of when a government doesn't protect its citizens, what recourse do they have? What do they do? And why would government see that as a threat to them, to have somebody else standing up for themselves? And then how do you deal with where criminals and like the line between a corrupt police officer and a criminal, how do you deal with that? I also wanted to see more of the old-fashioned type Humphrey Bogart type characters that we really don't see anymore in films. They're much more, I would say, unappealing for men like me or you or Aaron Clary. So I deliberately wrote that book to have that kind of a traditional masculine, unapologetic, and very determined, as opposed to letting outside events control him and dictate his fate.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
Reminds me of the African Queen. Humphrey Bogart. I love that movie. And also, I mean, a little more modern, but I would say still at the end of that era would be North by Northwest with Cary Grant. But yeah, I'm fascinated by the 1930s, the setting, and what also draws me to that time frame is it's divorced of social media, and I think it allows people to almost free themselves from contemporary narratives where you can't write a contemporary narrative without obviously referencing frequently social media. Right. I see it when my daughters watch, TV shows on Disney instead of Snapchat. It's Chat Snap and all of this, but I mean, it's so, in the Bizarre and whatever. I mean, they're okay shows, but I mean, it's just based on this complete extrinsic motivation and validation versus finding yourself. And I'd like to go and share a little bit. I was yesterday. I visited my 84-year-old aunt, and I periodically will go up and she's an awesome, fun aunt. I mean, if you could, if you can imagine a 84-year-old storyteller of life. She was a librarian in New Mexico before she got married, and ran a bookmobile and carried a gun with her to shoot rattlesnakes if they were on her path, and as she stopped into. She
sounds interesting enough to be your own story.
She has a declaration on her wall. She showed me yesterday, and I never knew this. It's from the mayor of New Mexico, and back years and years ago. But it is some special privilege of almost like a deputy sheriff type level. And I have to look it up, but she said, and she was serious, she said, there are very few of these that were ever given out, and it does allow me some privileges within New Mexico, which, she's now in Wisconsin. But I was like, wow. But she was telling me this story just yesterday, and we actually drove past the area where she grew up. She moved back to the town where she was raised, and of course, my dad and the rest of the family, but they were close to a railroad track. And in the 1930s, the railroad, basically what you would refer to as hobos, just going town to town, would jump off the train behind their house and walk up and knock on the door and would say, do you have any food or to spare, or can I do some work for any amount of money? Well, my dad's family wasn't wealthy by any means, but of course that they would try to help people out, or they would say, we have some extra, produce in the garden, you're welcome to it. And she's pointing it out. I mean, we're right there. We are right there, but instead of, 1938 or whenever this happened, it's yesterday. And it's so vivid, and she tells it, and it's almost, I'm driving home, and it's about 90 minutes to drive back to where I live, and I'm thinking, I feel that I've been denied that. That experience it was so lively the way she told it, and just the trust, and that was something she said. You just the trust you had in people, and you tried to to help people out, and but, of course, we weren't naive. We were looking out, but I'm like, I was just fascinated by that going home, and I had the radio off, and that's something else, TJ. Is if I'm not listening to a podcast, and I really don't do mainstream media anymore. I don't know about you, but I don't. I mean, someone
that's
will say,
kind of the way it is with me.
Yeah, someone will say, hey, did you know whatever or whatever? And I'm like, I have no idea. I mean, I barely track the weather.
Yeah. I have to stay abreast of things a little bit just because of my job. So I monitor social media for stuff that's relevant, but it's like everything. You got to know when the limit and be very intentional about restricting the amount of use of anything.
So, thank you for your books, and also, again, I love the time period, and reading is something I greatly value and appreciate, and even going down, to our library, they have like a little, they built an area as a fireplace, and they kind of make it into a cozy, there's some windows, and it's a really nice place to read. I don't kind of like to read at home, but I was there last year, and I had this massive, like 24-ounce black coffee, and of course, like as I'm setting up my my book, I knock over this coffee, and it's all over the floor, the synthetic wood floor. So I go to the bathroom, and I retrieve all of these industrial towels, and the thing is, like everyone was indifferent to it. I mean, I just cleaned it up and put it away, and the floor was brown anyway, so it didn't matter. But I'm like, no. So when you went to, you went to the British Isles, to England, to Scotland, and previous you were checking out the Civil War battlefields out east. Am I correct in that? Like, about a year or two ago or whatever. So tell me about that experience. Why did you do that? What did you expect? How was that part of like reconnaissance?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm really captivated by that, because those are things I didn't do in my life. And I followed a very linear path in my life. And tell me why you did this, how it impacted you. And
yeah. So a couple of years ago, I think it was 2016, I went to visit a relative of mine who lived in Maryland, was stationed at the Army base there. And I'd always wanted to go to the East Coast. I'd been to Boston once, but hadn't. When you're young, you really don't think about that stuff. You're in your own little world. But I was really interested in seeing the Civil War battlefields, these monuments, and obviously I wanted to go finally see the Declaration of Independence. I wanted to see the U.S. Constitution. I wanted to see things that I had heard about and talked about. And what I've found is that you can look at something in a photograph, or you can read about it, or you talk about it, but until you actually go see it, you're never going to fully understand what you're talking about. And so we went to the Gettysburg battlefield, and I had seen the film that was shot in the 1990s at the location, and standing at the spot where General Armistead, who was a Confederate general, he was during Pickett's charge, which was this massive, on the third day, the 15,000 men charged across the battlefield trying to break the Union lines. They were repulsed. This general made it the farthest to this one spot that's now marked, and I was standing there thinking that this is exactly where he stood. And then I look out to the tree line on the other side of the battlefield and thought, this is where these guys, those young boys and maybe middle-aged men, were in those trees waiting to come out to what they could rightfully believe was to their deaths in pursuit of victory. And I almost felt like they're the ghosts of these men. It just felt ghostly. It was the same thing when I went to Harper's Ferry, which is where that abolitionist John Brown tried to start an insurrection. You go to this town and you walk around and you just feel something unsettling and beyond, like otherworldly. But you would never know this if you just looked at the photos of these battlefields. But when you're there, and then when you're at the little round top, and you know for certain that those things are real because you've seen them yourself. I think that we tend to have a bit of the way we interact online. We don't fully grasp or accept that the person, whoever we're communicating with, is real. It's just something different to actually meet them in person or to actually go to a place. When I saw the Magna Carta, there's several copies, and the National Archives in DC has one of them. It was very emotional for me to look at this document that was written almost 1,000 years ago, and I had just seen a movie about the Magna Carta, and so it was, and it's part of my history. My family mostly comes from England, so, and seeing the King's seal on it that had been put there by King John, and he had actually signed this document and all that stuff. So, but this was not like you were saying, it wasn't an itinerary. There was no book. I just wrote out where I wanted to go. And we also changed plans accordingly when we found that there was something that we enjoyed doing more than others, or there was just places that we weren't as interested in. But you can't pre-plan life experiences, because some of the best moments you have in your life are going to be spontaneous and unexpected.
So TJ, it was maybe about 2 months ago, I did a podcast, and it was a school district outside of Cleveland, Ohio, 22 miles outside of Cleveland, Ohio. The parents voted to not allow the 8th grade students to go to Washington, D.C. for the 8th grade class trip, which was the annual class trip. And the reason was Washington, D.C., per the parents, was a terrorist target, and our children will be at risk. So we're not going to, school board, we're not going to allow this to happen. So the superintendent was pretty balanced, and he said, I've taken my own family there. But of course, there wasn't any reasoning with this group of parents. So that trip never happened. Those kids, the experience that they had was seeing some DVDs of here's monuments and some guide. So you have the positionality of whatever this guide is. I did a little more research into this, and it's starting to become more frequent, and it's very sad. It's very disturbing to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Because what is actually happening, it's in its infancy, but this will grow, is companies saying, hey, we can do your Washington, D.C. field trip, and you don't have to have the risk of going there. Now, I study the risk and things like this, and actually in the podcast, I said the risk of taking the bus over to Washington, D.C. was greater for a fatality in a normal, vehicle accident, not that the bus would be targeted, was greater than actually being in Washington, D.C. And both of those were significantly greater than you're more likely to be hit by lightning than either of those happening. So it was completely, it was rhetoric, but here we have 8th grade, 13, 14-year-olds being told the message that they're receiving is it's unsafe to do reconnaissance. Like what you're talking about, and the experience and being able to stand, in Washington D.C. or let's say hypothetically, somewhere else, you don't do it. I mean, because it's not safe. We can keep you safe here, which is a fallacy also, and you're 22 miles outside of Cleveland. But I felt such a loss for those students, and then I also felt such a loss for the parents that the parents didn't, I guess, know better or find a balanced argument to that, or say, listen, maybe we're going to be more cautious, but let's still do this. But no, it was a complete shutdown. And so there's these companies that are starting to do these virtual tours. Like all of the kids would go into a gymnasium and put on VR goggles, and they'd have some VR guide, and they kind of walk around, and it's still in its infancy, but like here, you're holding whatever. Yeah, like you're holding the Constitution, and really, it's the piece of paper that I have. So we're you talk about dystopian, views in society. That scared me because, I mean, I have two daughters in school. I would be terrified if that's what my district wanted to do, because we're not experiencing life in that case. We're doing almost a matrix view. But so as I tell it to you, what's your thought on something like that?
My thought is it sends a really bad message. And I want to caveat with saying I'm a bachelor, I don't have kids, so the issue of child safety is not going to be as mean the same thing to me. I'm sure that when I have kids, I'm going to be concerned about their safety. But one thing I feel like we're doing in this country that's very harmful is we're teaching kids that safety is more important than anything else. And even the slightest perception of any kind of danger, and it's not even rational. Like you were saying, it's riskier for them just be in the car driving. But people are not thinking through logically, and they're also allowing themselves to be controlled by other people who can just make threats or just make claims. And imagine the message that would be sent if the school talked about it and somebody told the kids, we want you to be aware that there's this threat or there's possible danger, but we believe that you seeing these things is worth it because that's how important they are to us as a society. It is that important for you to go see the Magna Carta. It is important for you to go see these documents because they didn't come without cost. And if we want to talk about risk, when people don't seem to understand this today. When the Declaration of Independence was signed, these men were likely signing their own death warrant. That's why John Hancock wrote his signature so large so that King George could read him without his glasses. And that's where the famous comment where somebody said, we'll all hang together, and Franklin said, yeah, we'll all hang separately. But they were going to be hanged if they were, they would have all been executed had they lost the war. And so that was the spirit of the War of Independence, was that we could likely die a very horrific death for this, but we believed it is worth the risk. And that would be a great way to explain why these documents matter to these kids, by allowing them to go and giving them the choice. But it wasn't even, they weren't even allowed to make that decision for themselves. They're being forced to be safe by people who are not really thinking about even the odds of that. And so kids are it's going to affect their mentality and their mindset as they go out in life and become adults. They're not going to think about how can I be successful or what's the best decision for me. They're going to think, which one's the safest? Right. Which one is, if you just sit in your room and don't do anything, yeah, you'll be safe. But is that really what life is about? The people who've lived the most fulfilling lives, how many of them would say that they lived a safe life as opposed to living an adventurous life? I always think, I mentioned on my podcast, Jack London, he's, for me, the kind of writer in some ways, in a lot of ways, I want to be like, because he didn't just write about stuff. He lived a very adventurous life. He lived out in the Yukon, or the Klondike, and which is not a very safe area. He wrote stories about men freezing to death because they couldn't build a fire in the middle of the forest when it's below zero. He obviously knew that life, but that's what makes life interesting, is when you go outside of that. So I don't know what these virtual tours look like. I know that they're not going to fascinate kids as much as possible, because it's just another example of them seeing something that's a replica, and it will never replace the authentic document. Right.
I think kids will be bored. I mean, I mean, the way that you framed that was exactly what needed to be conveyed. And the sad part is, I'm not sure that it would have made, unfortunately, a difference to the parents who already had their mind made up of nope, Washington D.C. is a terrorist target, and we're not going to take risk.
I do want to add, I made a comment on my Facebook page if people want to go. It's facebook.com/TJ Martinell. I'd read an article talking about how London was now considered less safe than New York City. Going back to my trip to London, or to the British Isles, I spent a week in London. I went out, and I was in the central part of the town, but at no point did I ever feel unsafe. And I'm a pretty big guy, but at the same time, I didn't see any gangs. There was nothing that made me believe that a crime was going on or imminent. And I was out late at night, several nights. So people also need to think about, where are you going in a city? Because these cities are not small. They're huge cities. So people say, well, Washington, D.C. is not safe. Well, which part of Washington, D.C. are you going to? Are you going to the touristy areas? Are you going to the Capitol? There's obviously, and they may say, well, terrorist attacks can occur anywhere. Well, at some point, if you're going to make that kind of a life choice, just know you're going to be full of regret on your deathbed. That's the choice that you are going to have to make. And if you think that's that important, but people want to have it both ways. They want to have a fulfilling life without any risk. Well, that's not how life works.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we get into the heuristics of this, and people don't want to hear. That's something as a safety professional, and it really has, it's challenged me, I guess more than I expected just in the last year, with the Las Vegas shooting and then the Parkland school shooting. I was contacted by national media as a safety expert, and then would produce one page that would be, here's a citation of this, and this, and then also do a 20-30 minute interview, and of course have some snippets pulled out that weave together very well into largely a narrative, which was, we need to fortify schools with guards and things. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly, again, I understand how this gets taken out of context. But when I was a school administrator, and Sandy Hook, the Sandy Hook massacre happened in December 2012, at least 80% of the feedback from people in the community, including parents mostly, and we're talking hundreds of emails and letters, but it was fortify the schools. We want bulletproof glass. We want guards at the doors and all of these things.
Yeah.
And that is it's frightening because, one, there isn't a profile of a shooter or a mass shooter or a school shooter, and all you're doing is creating a sense of a hardened target. Well, the reality is, as soon as the students walk outside or walk on a playground, or if they're at a mall or a Little League game, and the thing is, again, these things are very rare. They're horrific. They're reported. Right. And I also, I did some research just recently into the number of suicides, for example, on the new bridge adjacent to Hoover Dam. Yeah. And that's become a pretty frequent destination for people seeking to complete suicide, just as a Golden Gate. But with Golden Gate, it was stop reporting on it, and also now that's been the decision that was made on this bridge next to Hoover Dam. And I've seen movement of let's not have as much media coverage on these types of events, because I also witness it does become copycat event. It becomes, I want to be in the limelight, and the Parkland shooter emulated Klebold and Harris, and
This actually occurred back in the early 1900s in Japan, where these couples were throwing themselves into a volcano, and the press was being so lurid and melodramatic that it inspired other people to do it. And it was one of the most bizarre stories I've ever read. It was in this book of really weird history facts, but the press was basically blamed for playing them up to where other people wanted to do it for reasons I can't possibly imagine. But yeah, that phenomenon is not a new one of having media highlighting something and then calling attention to it to other people who might have otherwise not thought of it.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
So as a journalist, how does that impact what you see around you with colleagues? Is there more of a pause before reporting something that has to do with let's say it is a mass shooting or something to that effect of, is this going to, or is it, no, we have to report this? And I don't know.
So I work right now in a news site that covers industry mainly, so we don't cover these. Thankfully, I don't have to really deal with those. I do know, though, local journalism is not infected with the same kind of stuff we see with national journalism, because if you write something that causes harm to the community, the people live across the street, city hall's just down the block, and people can come and write in the newsroom and complain about stuff. Whereas, CNN, they've got the secure headquarters or whatever it is, and you show up to some area that you've never been to, you write a story, and then you leave, and if there's damage done, well, they're 3,000 miles away, and it would have to be legally an issue before they'll actually care about it. So I think local journalism people are a little bit more cognizant of it. Not only that, a lot of the reporters, if they live in the town, they know the people that they're writing about.
Right.
So they're thinking, how is this going to come across? But it was definitely something that I was thinking about after Sandy Hook, when I took a step back and was asking myself, how can we be more responsible with what we're doing? Because it's the same thing with so many of our rights. We have a lot of power, but it also comes with, as the saying goes, with responsibility, that we need to exercise those rights in an appropriate manner. And just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. I actually covered a case, the links to it on my website, on my reporting portfolio. I covered a high school hazing scandal that occurred, and it was definitely something where we had to be thinking about the community and because we got a very thick police case documents and had a lot of material, but we just felt like there was a lot of stuff that people did not need to know about. Right. And we wanted to protect, obviously, people who were innocent, but it's a community. It's still a small enough city where people are going to know, even if you don't say their name, they're going to know what's going on. So it's definitely a topic that I feel like needs to be discussed more, and by people who are willing to actually have that conversation.
So that, to me, that's responsible journalism, and in no way, for the listeners, I am not trying to take this in an anti-journalism type perspective, because I don't. Journalism is a means, and I think what we've lost, though, is people are taking the first bit of information and they're just going with it, and they're vetting it, and just like the trail, just like when it snows and it's like, here's the trail, here I'm going for it. And it's that first piece of information. What was it? October 31st, Halloween on 1938, I believe. Orson Welles did the War of the Worlds broadcast, and it was amazing. Also did a podcast on that, of the people who would, when they heard that, the panic. But there was no vetting. There was no trying to verify. I mean, some people did this, but other people just went with it. And not only the fact that it wasn't accurate, but then they built their own scaffolding reports. Like a farmer would say, I see this right now. Like I actually was outside and I saw this, and there's footprint, or the pod prints are in my field. And it was a Princeton University professor went out with a group of I think it was in a journalism class. I could be mistaken though. It might have been sociology. And they went out a day later and they interviewed a lot of people while this was still fresh. And a number of people stood with their stories, even though by that time it had come out and said, no, this was just, this was a radio performance. But a university professor stood by his story, police officers stood by their story, that they had visually confirmed these things. And again, I talked earlier about my aunt. And a couple of months ago, she doesn't live too far from where Air Force fighters periodically will do flyovers. And there was a sonic boom, and everything in the house shook, and actually a picture fell down. And then she said her neighbors went outside, and the first thing she did is she went over to the radio and turned it on, and the local radio, and they said there was a sonic boom. That was an aircraft. There wasn't an explosion or anything like that. And there's going to be another one, so anticipate it. But she said, that was her method to validate. But she said her neighbors were thinking there was an explosion at the factory, the big factory in town, or that something had crashed or whatever. Weren't necessarily thinking like terrorism or that, because this wasn't an area, but had come to these conclusions instead of seeking out to validate. And then they just built off of their own stories. So I want to take us in a little bit of a different direction. This has been fascinating, TJ. So you talked about working close to the Seattle Seahawks football stadium.
Yeah.
And I can just imagine, because I know when they built that not too long ago, maybe a decade ago or whatever, it was designed to be the loudest football stadium in the NFL, the way that they... I don't know, the way that it was built, so it would register the highest decibels when the ball appeared. And I attended Green Bay Packer home games in the 80s and 90s. And actually in the 90s, I think I was at every home game. And then lost interest after that. And don't even watch the games on Sunday. I'm not anti-team. It's just, but it was something my brother and I, we had gone to games. But you talked about this in your podcast of how people, just trying to make sense out of these people who are willing now to spend on, a ticket, $100, $200. They buy the team jacket, and they have all of these investments that they put into going to this game. And also kind of thinking that, they have a connection to the team. Well, the team has no idea who you are. The players have no idea who you are, nothing. Right. And it has become unbelievable. I mean, I want to go in a little bit after I get your take on your experiences with that. But, now these stadiums are billions of dollars, and you have these high definition, 80-foot replay boards and all these what they call fan amenities. We have to do this to keep the fans interested. I'm thinking, well, no, I mean, the fans want to come see a great game. I don't care if the game is out in the hayfield. I mean, if it's a great game between talented teams, but no, it's the quote unquote fan experience. And I have ticket stubs that literally, it's like $22 for a row, 42 seat 8. And that was like my, the season. I mean, that would be everything. So, right. But tell me, I guess, what's your thought about that, and maybe what's soured you on this movement toward these massive, I guess, palaces to sports, and just how, I guess, even to build off of that, we just got done with the Olympics. And I was reading how much were paid for TV rights for the Olympics, and then also, of course, they do the little documentaries of, like, here's where the Olympics is, in Sochi and all these other places, which now are completely abandoned, and nobody takes. I mean, once the Olympics are gone, these places are left to rot. Right. Just a waste of resources and money. But so, I'll be honest. I mean, I don't know many people your age who are not really diehard, full committed to some type of either college team or professional team. So what's that experience been like for you?
It's interesting because I grew up being a diehard Utah Jazz fan. My mother was born and raised in Salt Lake City, and so I was getting a lot of hand-me-downs from her family of these Jazz. But then I got really hooked on Karl Malone and John Stockton, who actually went to college in the same area as I, not the same college, but same area. But I liked the way that they worked together to make the team do really well, because John Stockton would steal the ball and get it to Karl Malone, and he'd go in for the delivery, which is why he was called the mailman. So I really followed them until they lost in that tragic, I think it was 96 or 97, but Michael Jordan managed to pull off that three-pointer, I think, at the buzzer.
Yep.
Yeah, and so after that, I just threw my hands up, because that was the second time that they had lost, and I've always been more of an action-oriented person. I was on sports teams. I was always doing stuff, and I enjoyed watching sports, but for the sake of watching the game. I wasn't really caught up too much in really just the culture, the sports culture. And I was also, I think when I got in high school, I did running. So running is it's not a spectator sport. There's not nearly as many people watching a cross-country runner, and I guess that people are gravitated towards that who are about performance and achievement, and not necessarily on how many people are going to be watching you. But I really got kind of turned off of it because I was seeing people who I knew or around me who were really into a team, but they weren't doing stuff in their own life. For example, I know a lot of men who are into football watching it, but if we wanted to go play football, they wouldn't be so enthusiastic about it. If anybody wants to go have a turkey bowl, I'm down for it.
Right.
And I'd love to play football, but I'm not going to sit there and have it consume so much of my time and energy, especially when I have no control over it. I guess I would say, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody here, but the fantasy football leagues to me is a very odd thing. I've never understood it, because it's guys watching a game and then complaining about how their player didn't perform. And I'm thinking, they have no idea who you are. You didn't hire them, and it's sort of like a considered to be a more masculine version of one of those card games, or I don't know. When I was working in Seattle, downtown Seattle, across from the stadium, that was the year that they won the Super Bowl, and they didn't just win that game; they completely trounced the Broncos.
Right.
And so there was that huge parade when they came back. It was literally something out of one of those 1950s Bible films where they got the Roman parade in Rome or whatever, like from Ben-Hur. And I was just working. I peeked out of the window to see what the commotion was. My biggest interest in it was figuring out how it was going to affect my traffic getting home.
Right.
But, a lot of the workers asked for permission to go down and actually be there rather than doing work. And if they want to do that, that's fine. It's just I want to put my interest in things that I have control over. And I feel like a lot of people who are really into sports, and they're also into a team, but what happens when the players go away? I was really into the Mariners back when they were winning 116 games. Jay Buhner, who was one of their hitters, his kids went to my private school, and I actually did Who's on First. Did a performance of that for him and got him to sign a bunch of stuff. So that was kind of cool. But I also liked watching them because they were such a good team. You were seeing a almost 21st century version of the 1927 Yankees, Murderers Row, except it was in Seattle, and they were doing really well. And then after that season, they just have never really quite recovered. So for me, for sports, it's a question of, are you watching the game to witness people do really well at something and achieve victory, or are you watching it almost for the soap opera that it can become? And you're more interested in the celebrity gossip of these players that I see a lot of people doing. And then where you invest your emotions, I think people should be investing their emotions not in someone who doesn't know them, has no idea who they are, and may not actually like them if they met them in person.
Oh,
And we
right.
see the same thing. We see the same thing with, Hollywood celebrities. People are really into that stuff. And I get it when you're young. You get really excited about something. I was really into James Bond when I was a kid, but I'm not obsessed with what Sean Connery is doing with his life right now or something like that.
So when I attended games at Lambeau Field, and Lambeau Field has undergone massive renovations and updates and expansions since then, but I mean, it wasn't much different than when they had the Ice Bowl in '67. I mean, the stadium was virtually the same. And I remember very clearly, that they had the analog, or not, well, I mean, they had digital scoreboards, but it was the lights, and it had the little relays, because the one scoreboard wasn't too far in back of us. Every time it would tick down, you could hear the relays clicking. And so basically, it gave you the home score, the opponent score, and yardage, passing yards, rushing, and that was it. I mean, that was it. There was nothing. There wasn't a jumbotron, and so it was just the score, and you didn't have all of these sky boxes. And I remember going into a game, and we'd go early, and you could walk up toward the field, the fence, that went around, and they also had, remember, like, gym class underneath the basketball hoops, they had those mats in case you run into them. Well, they had mats all the way around the stadium on the inside in case the players would overrun. And none of the mats matched. I mean, like, none of, every color was a different shade of green. I mean, it was like this bad St. Patrick's Day nightmare. And that was something too. I mean, I'm like, this is an NFL team, and these mats. But again, it was, and the field was great for like the first two home games, and then after that, like the grass started to die because they didn't have those special ultraviolet grow lights that they have now. So it was, so then basically it was playing out on sand and mud, and they would just paint it. But I remember one of the coolest things, we showed up for, a season, and they had across from us a scoreboard. So if you have a garage door, just a single garage door, single car, and it has like 4 panels on it. So this thing was basically the size of one panel, like 2 foot high by maybe 8 feet wide. And the only purpose of this was to give the out-of-town scores for the games. So it might say like NOSF, like New Orleans at San Francisco, and then it would give the score, 21-7, and then the period would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and if it was overtime, it would become a 0. But there was no OT. I mean, it was just, and we were fascinated by that. We were like, and people around us are like, look at this. There's out-of-town scores right now. Like this is incredible. And and we're walking back, and you left the truck unlocked out in the parking lot, and walking back, and I'm like, that's amazing. And I'm thinking, and something like that today in a high school gym wouldn't be acceptable. I mean, but and now, they have $14 million in high definition, like 4K replay boards that show all of this stuff. And I mean, and I also remember we were up and we were watching the players kind of warm up, and some guy pulls out a knife, which has a serrated edge on the back of it, and the thing's like 2 foot long. He pulls it out of this holster, and he's cutting duct tape, and he's putting up this big sign, like "Go Packers," and security comes up to him, and all they say is like, put the knife away. They didn't say to reject it. They didn't tackle the guy. But I remember like looking over, and he pulls out this big knife that he just said walked in, because and he didn't worry about things back then. But I do remember how exciting it was to watch the games. And if somebody got injured, you didn't know. You didn't immediately have everybody checking their phone, and you had like one person 3 seats ahead that had headphones that had the little pull out the antenna that would come out, and we'd be waiting for that guy to give an update, and then he'd turn around and be like, "Oh, I just heard on the radio that they just took this guy in for like an X-ray. It could be an ankle injury." And then it's like, whoa, like nobody knew that just went around. But that was such an organic experience, and I loved it. And we talk about rituals. A ritual we had is we did always stop at a Ponderosa on the way home in this one town, and we always tried to prank each other. It was my brother and kind of his friends. When we went up, if you went to the salad bar, you came back, you might find, your fork bent in half or something like that, or I don't know. But it was always just kind of a good ribbing type thing that always went along with this that we had at the end. But and two, it would be you get to a break, a commercial break, and instead of like all of these ads up on the boards like they have now, there'd be some guy who would go out there and he'd have a frisbee dog, and he'd be whipping frisbees out on the field, and this dog would be jumping up and catching them, and everybody would be clapping, and it'd be great.
Yeah.
And that's gone, and I don't. And I went to one game with all of the new stuff, and it's like it just overloaded me, and I just felt, nope, not for me. I was turned off by it, completely turned off by it. So
yeah,
I had mentioned this. Are you a video gamer? Do you play video games?
It's funny you should say that, because my brother just gave me one of his spare Xbox Ones, and it's the first time I've had we had the Xbox when Halo first came out, but I really haven't played video games. I was into Call of Duty, but I never had one. I was really into playing that online stuff in college, and then there was this one day after 4 hours of playing, I got up and just thought to myself, what exactly have I accomplished in this last 4 hours? I've killed about 300 Nazis, but I haven't really accomplished anything in life. So I just decided every now and then I'll play stuff, but I've never I'm not updated on a lot of the stuff that's going on now. I was big into it when I was a kid. I was into Zelda and all that other stuff, and I followed that stuff religiously, but you can only have so many hobbies when that stuff's expensive, especially back then new games were $60, which you're a kid and you're trying to afford that, it's like your whole your whole month or two of work errands or whatever allowance, whatever they give kids. But the Call of Duty games are pretty much the only ones I've been following.
So, when I was in college, we would play games. It was Sega back then, and actually, so we did the sports game like Sega football and basketball and
the original Madden.
Yeah, I have the original Madden, and we would write down. My roommates and I, we kept logs of every game, all of the statistics. So it'd be like, don't clear the screen yet, Craig. Like I didn't get down like the yardage and the half and all of this, and we kept these immaculate documents of every game that we ever played. But at the same time, we would play, but then we did other things. Like we were never addicted to the game. The TV was off a lot of times. We were out. We played, all the intramural sports. We had a field next to us, so we would be out throwing the football or doing whatever, biking, bike trail, stuff like that. So I wanted to bring up and get your thought on this, because I've been reading too, the average video game player is now 34. And the amount of time that's being spent playing video games is drastically increasing through all ages, including elderly in nursing homes. Now, of course, the plus side on that, and I interviewed Sean Dickers, who has studied and actually teaches courses in video games at Bethel University. But, so what the effect is in a nursing home is increasing, reflexes and reaction time and things like that. It can also be addictive and, of course, passing time. But, but if you're talking about somebody who is 34, 30 years old or whatever, even younger, and you are just spending hours upon hours upon hours playing games, you're not accomplishing anything real. Everything that you're accomplishing is virtual. You're not improving your body. You're not doing reconnaissance. But so another part that I think is very disturbing, 10 years ago, video games were designed to be captivating because of the quality of the game. And I listened to a couple podcasts with folks that had defected out of the game industry, designers. Yeah. And they said, oh, no, it's different right now. The companies are hiring psychologists, psychiatrists, sociologists, and they are designing games to specifically become addictive and to play on people's emotions and to hook them in. And the example is push notifications. Like, hey, you haven't played for 12 hours and your dragon is dying. So you have to go in right now and play. But if you don't, you can also do a quick PayPal of $5 and, we'll take care of your dragon.
Of course.
But it's getting to the point where it's getting very, very deep. I mean, and people are feeling this tie, especially in tribal type games where they feel that either they have this genuine group that they're working with in some kind of multiplayer game. I listened to one player who was driving somewhere and couldn't get to his home or wherever he was going to play, and was so panicked, actually pulled over at like a restaurant or something, and didn't have cell service. That was part of the deal, was somewhere where there wasn't was sketchy cell service, and like begged to use a landline so you could like call somebody so they could go in and make a post and say, oh, like Scott's not going to be able to be in tonight because he's whatever. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like this is freaky. But this whole push notification, I think goes to this building this external sense of validation. And when we, so we're talking a lot about agency and purpose, but you are being now externally purposed, externally motivated, and rewarded by something which is an algorithm. And it's frightening to me because it's being done in a way that's very, very targeted. And so where does this, this is video games, but this could easily become into social media. It's already done, I guess, in social media to some extent with updates. And I worked with a young man recently who became so addicted to push notifications that he needed to turn over his phone at night to adults. And he did this willingly, but he said, I can't sleep. I'm just like waiting, and I'm checking everything that's coming through. You got a new email, or there's a new post on Facebook or whatever, and recognized it. And but the push notifications, I think, are very, very frightening to me. So give me your thoughts, because I think this fits in too with your framework for your writing.
Yeah, that is definitely, I think, when you are logged in on your phones to different social media. I was experiencing this myself, where I was constantly getting notifications from Facebook or from other apps where it felt like I needed to respond, or was just distracting me when I was trying to work on something. And then I also had a bit of this epiphany, and it was a couple weeks ago, where I just realized what exactly am I accomplishing with what's going on, because a lot of it was just conversations I was having online, discussions, or just posting and all that. And a lot of it wasn't really going anywhere. It wasn't helping me provide the kind of practical knowledge. For example, they're not going to teach me how to do the kind of stuff that, say, Aaron Clary's book, Bachelor of Economics. That was a more productive 3-hour use of my time reading through that book than, talking to all these people online about stuff that's not going to teach me the knowledge to get to where I want to go. And I finally just cut off all notifications on these different apps, and I am very conscientious about logging in on them. I have to use them for some of them for work related purposes, but it causes us to not do stuff. We're sitting around just waiting for somebody to do something, to get that notification so then we can respond. And that's partly why I don't have internet at my house. I use my phone's mobile data for internet, but I don't have internet, so I don't have cable, I don't have Netflix. And one of the reasons is because it can consume you. I knew somebody I knew in college who was addicted to watching YouTube videos. He would just watch all these stupid videos. I mean, they're funny, but they're stupid videos. And he would just watch them for hours and hours and hours on end. And then you've got people who are, like with video games, it just makes me kind of glad I never really got into that. I kind of got out what I did. And when you realize it's affecting you, and I was actually having the same problem where I would go to bed at night and I would just sit there with my phone, just looking at Twitter, feed, seeing what was going on in the world. It's so much. We have so much access to so much information we can't handle. We get overwhelmed. I think the other problem is we also get a false perception of reality because we only get so much information out of all that's out there, but it's going to shape the way we view the world, the way we view people. And I realized that kind of like with your aunt or trying to confirm something that happened in real life with what they're seeing on TV or whatever. Did this really happen? Or when Orson Welles was doing that radio broadcast, people should have just looked outside their window and not seeing no UFO. So again, all these things can be useful. You just have to be disciplined in how you use them. It's like any other product you have or service that you use. But I'm seeing it. You go everywhere, and people don't look at each other, interact. I actually when I was in Britain. I was on the coast in Dover, and I went into a pub that specifically had a sign that said no cell phones allowed, and they had chairs all in a circle, so you would sit down, and you had to talk to people because you couldn't use your phone, and you're looking across at somebody else. So I had all these great conversations with these people in this. In this English town, because they were very conscientious about ensuring that people are going to go in there. The whole point of a public house is to be social and to socially interact, not to just stare at your phone. And I know people will go back and say, well, 70 years ago it was the newspaper. People were reading the newspaper. Yes, that's because humans don't change, just the technology that we use to get addicted to. But yeah, going to the video game thing of people being 34, I think it's because they're probably the first generation that's gone through their entire lives with having actual video games that are separate from other types of uses. Video games were kind of a novelty. You had the arcades or whatever, but in my generation, the older millennials, they've grown up with a Nintendo. Nintendo has always been around for the entire time, so it's part of their childhood memory to have this stuff in them. But I also can't say I'm an atypical millennial in that sense. I have video game consoles in my house, but I rarely, if ever, use them.
Yeah, I don't know where that's going to go, especially with VR, but it does bring up this whole concern I have with extrinsic validation and controlling. And again, we always have to realize, it's the positionality of whoever's creating that game. That you are, that you are being led down certain paths, but those choices have been predetermined by the makers of the game. So your control in these, situations is really very limited. But so one of the things, that video games are based off of is this whole badge system, or, very quickly you can earn, like quote unquote a badge or some accolade, and then it builds upon that. And that's very specifically done to keep you engaged in the game. And yet these things mean nothing in reality. I mean, they don't, but they're not transferable. So you were talking about you get to the top of a mountain or complete a hike, bring out your pipe, and we'll smoke your pipe. We'll take in what's around you. And I see that obviously as a ritual. And I want you to tell me about that. And before you tell me about it too, there was, I felt frustration when I listened to the one podcast of the young man who came up, and it was a misty day or a little bit cloudy, and he's up there with you, and instead of appreciating what's around him, because I will, like when I run most nights, and I run when it rains, and I run when it's 10 below, and it doesn't matter that I find as much pleasure in rainy nights running as if it's 10 below as I do if it's 70 degrees and something like that. But he gets up there and he's like, oh, what a waste! I can't see anything. So and I'm like, oh, like no, isn't it? It's awesome because it's going. Even just doing that, or just like the humidity in the air maybe brings out a little more of the earthiness if you take the time to close your eyes and smell. And I'm just, as you're telling that, I'm feeling the same frustration or paralleling some frustration I think you were conveying in that podcast of, no, like, it's not that you get there and it's just boom. It's like it unfolds, you take it in, and he didn't allow that immediately to happen. So tell me about, I guess, your hiking and how rituals are a part of that, and how they've grown.
Yeah, so I started doing hiking. I'd done hiking in Boy Scouts when I was a kid, and I really didn't do that during college and then after college. And then there was one point when I just decided I hadn't done hiking. I needed to go out and do that. And there was all these, I lived in a town that was right next to the mountains, so it seemed like I needed to go enjoy that and take advantage of it. And so I would go hiking, and I also was getting into smoking tobacco pipes. Somebody had given me one as a Christmas gift, so I was learning more about how to use it. Well, the thing is, you can't really use it in your house, and you can't use it elsewhere because it'll obviously bring up the smell. You got to change your clothes afterwards. So there's not a lot of environments, maybe at a very nice social thing where it's just acceptable to bring out cigars or whatever. So hiking seemed an ideal place to do that. So we'd go hiking, I'd get up to the top of the mountain, and then I'd take out the pipe and just sit there and work on learning how to smoke it properly, because it is an art. For some people who don't know, when learning, it's not like they have in the movies with Sherlock Holmes where he just pulls out a match, lights his pipe, and then just starts smoking. No, that's like the first step of several to actually getting it to work properly. And it wasn't intentional. It just it went together, but then it became a ritual over time, to where it was important for me to do that because it was sort of for me a celebration of a completion of a hike, and it invited itself for me to just sit there and enjoy the view. To even when there wasn't a actual view of the area, there's still a place that you can still see around you, and even if you can't, then you can just imagine what the place looks like with a clear sky. And then just think about stuff. Think about, the fact that you get to go out into the woods. There are people, I was mentioning this on my podcast, there's people in this country who have never seen a mountain. And to me, growing up in the Cascades, living in the Cascades, it sounds like a death sentence of some kind of the soul, to not be able to go see the kind of things that I've seen. And people who are interested can go to my Instagram account. It's private, but I let people in. I just want to control that. Instagram.com/TJ Martinell. I have a lot of the photos I've taken of these hikes, and even when the weather wasn't that great, I still got some fantastic scenes of just stuff, or it looks like something out of Lord of the Rings, like the Misty Mountains, or
right.
Just whatever. So you can always enjoy it. You just have to be willing to accept things as they are. And thankfully, the area I live in, even when it rains, it still looks nice compared to other areas where it's, when it's gray and cloudy, it just looks a little depressing.
One of the things when I run is I do what I call appreciations, or I would say it's a ritual. I try to find stars. Hopefully, if it's a starry night. If not, I have to substitute other things. But and I try to relate that to either people who have been significant in my life, who have passed, or else maybe events that I've completed, personally in my life. But as I go through, the first thing I do is I just say out loud, I'm thankful I'm able to do this. I'm thankful I'm able to be out here running tonight. And that's the first thing. And then I'm thankful that I'm healthy, and I'm thankful that my family's healthy, and going through, and the value in that is immense, because it's I just don't hear that a lot. And I have to say, I mean, straight up, I was addicted to social media. 4 or 5 years ago, and we as a family deleted Facebook, everything. The only thing we have is Twitter, and then my safetyphd.com website, which largely is just my blog. But we don't have social media. And it's funny because a friend of mine got out of the Navy, and he said, I had a really hard time trying to find you because you're like nowhere out there. Like, I can't find you on Facebook. And, so what's your Facebook? I'm like, dude, I haven't been on Facebook like in 4 or 5 years. So I'm not in, you on this. I'm like, no, I'm not, And just for us, I mean, I was finding it wasn't serving, it was consuming a lot of time, and it was probably also consuming time that I could have been out running or I could have been out biking. But I have a ritual, and then I want to get your thought on what the difference between a ritual and a routine is. But I got into biking big time and will bike 70, 80 miles. Maybe, I mean, for me, that's a lot. When I was biking maybe 4 or 5 miles and I was out of shape and just preoccupied by other things. But I mean, I focus on my bike treks, and I stop at a cemetery that is, there isn't a church there anymore. And it's from probably, like the late 1800s, the stones. So I did some research on it. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of like halfway though. It's this point where I can bike up and it's just quiet. There's a large field in front of it, and I can just walk through and I can look at the different gravestones and then kind of think, well, here's somebody who fought in World War I, and it has the little, insignia, and just trying to picture what it was like during those times, and then I can speak out loud. I mean, there aren't any other people around, and just, it is amazing to do that and to have that. I don't know if it's relational or if there's, I don't know exactly what it is. But there is one gravestone, it's more recent, and it was a boy with cerebral palsy who died at age 10. Most of the gravestones are very much in the 1880s, but I kind of tend to this stone. He has his pictures on there, and I looked up the death notice, and I didn't know this boy at all, but I will tend to the stone a little bit if some things have been knocked down, some of the flowers or winds or whatever, and just say a little prayer and just move on. And to me, that's a ritual. Like I feel like I've accomplished something with introspection of putting myself in the thoughts, recognizing the people that have gone before me, the contributions they've made, like saying things like, I appreciate the work that you've done, and, because now the fields around the community and any of the buildings and just the work, and, if in your time in the service and things like that. And, it's also strange because as I was looking up the cemetery, it's like, oh yeah, it's like the second most haunted cemetery in Wisconsin. I was like, what? I've never.
As I was about to say, you were saying it was on top of a hill all by itself, and I was like, this is something right out of a Vincent Price horror film.
Yeah, so there's like all these ghost people who set up there and do the EVPs. I never have felt anything like that, but I do feel a very connectedness, and it is very powerful for me. But I think people, when we talk about rituals, people think about routines, and they're like, oh yeah, my ritual is I get up in the morning and then I, make my coffee, and then I, get the radio, so I know the forecast and what to dress. And then, I do this, and I'm like, whoa, like that's not ritual. That's routine. That's what we call like your Taurus or everyday, kind of like what you do. Like getting in your car and starting your car and driving to work is not a ritual. So I think people conflate what is truly a ritual versus like a routine. And even the Harvard Business Review article kind of gets a little fuzzy in that. They lose their footing a little bit. So tell me how you would separate the two.
I would say that routine is something that we do as part of our everyday lives, making your bed, brushing your teeth, doing your laundry. None of that is special or notable unless you're not a very cleanly, not a very cleanly person, but just stuff that you do every day, and it's just part of who you are. That's routine. Like what kind of, for example, routine for me, for breakfast, I eat eggs. That's my routine, but that's not a ritual. A ritual is when you're trying to separate something, and it could have originally been a routine, but it's something that you set apart to make it special or to note that it is different from everything else. And a ritual that came to mind when I was thinking about this was, in my family, for years, we went on the day after Thanksgiving, we would go to a Christmas tree farm in the central part of the state where I now live. And we would go chop down a Christmas tree, and we would bring it home, and we would have breakfast at a certain restaurant on our way there. And then we would take all of our Christmas stuff from the attic and we'd bring it down and we would decorate the house that weekend. So that was for years the tradition. And then this year I had my folks over for Thanksgiving at my house. We went into the middle of the national forest and chopped down a natural tree that had not been in a farm and brought that back. So that's going to be my ritual from now on that I have my own house. So that's different from a routine because you don't do that every single day. And it's making it, you could easily have just gone to a hardware store and bought a tree out of a lot, and that maybe would have been a little bit more of a routine, even though it is a part of the holidays, but it's not that big of a deal. You just go grab a tree,
Right.
give the guy the money, and then go home. And so it's when the rituals aren't religious in nature. I think that's important. They're spiritual but not religious. Religion does tend to make a nice home for rituals. So if in a lot of traditional churches, they're going to have, or religions, they're going to have a lot of rituals, but they're not routine. They're doing the sacraments, or I would say a baptism. For certain denominations, they do infant baptism. Well, that's not a routine, that's a ritual.
Right.
It's a ceremony and things like that. One example I wanted to say, so I live in a Bavarian tourist town called Leavenworth.
Okay.
So if you go, it looks in a lot of ways just like it geographically as well. And during the Christmas season, they have the town and all the trees around the main part of town turn on, and the lights, just a lot of Christmas light stuff. It's at the same time every single day, but on the weekends in December they have a Christmas lighting ceremony where they have a ceremony prior to the lights going on, and we will have tens of thousands of people come here to experience this. And I have to now mark those days off my calendar to not leave my house because the traffic, it's two lanes, it's a highway, but there's only one lane going each way. So traffic gets really crazy. But it's all because they want to come there for a ritual, to watch a ritual that is made for something that happens every single day of the week. And they even have to tell people that now. If you want to come see it and you can't make it, you can come during the week, or you can come on another day. They turn the lights on until Valentine's Day. But that's, I think, shows why people take ritual important, because it's people collectively and consciously getting together to celebrate something or do something and make it special, even though it's in other ways ordinary. So that was one of the thoughts I had on that. I would also say that rituals can be used to mark different seasons. So you have a lot of in older cultures, you would have stuff that marked the end of fall and the beginning of winter, the beginning of spring. We call it Groundhog Day now. That's kind of, but people don't really celebrate it anymore, make a big deal out of it. But I think that there is, though, lack of rituals for important stuff. For example, when a child becomes an adult.
Yes.
There's no, in a lot of traditional cultures, when a boy or girl become a young adult, there's a ceremony, and then when they become an adult, there's another ceremony or something like that. But it's marking a different stage in life.
Yes.
And it's marking a change. And so when they don't have that, it creates a lack of continuity, but also importance. And I'm trying to think of it marks a clear division between two different parts of your life, or two different parts of seasons. So like, when does winter and fall, like, what's the difference? Well, we just decided on this day, that's
Right.
the beginning of winter, and this is the beginning of fall, even though it may snow in the fall and rain in the winter. But that's just, we mark those days, or mark those times. So I think that there are a lot of areas and opportunities for rituals today. We just don't have them anymore, which is kind of tragic.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
I feel the same way. I feel a loss, and I don't know how to recapture that. I think personally I've been able to do that, but again, I think it gets into people are mistaking routines, or you get a ritual which becomes very, I would say, like it doesn't have any productive outcome. The ritual would be before every home game of whatever sports team, I am going to paint my face blue and do a special design, and this is my ritual because I feel that this supports the team somehow.
The juju.
And it's like, well, I guess you could say that is a ritual, but it also is nothing that has any benefit to it. It's not causing you any chance to reflect. It's really just giving you an opportunity to be part of this collectivism and the pseudo perception that you're influencing externally something that all you're doing is paying ticket prices and occupying a seat. So I don't find but
it's also a question of identity. You're identifying with a sports team. And I always ask somebody this question. What if they, for example, Richard Sherman, who's been part of the Seahawks for years, is now going with the 49ers. So what are you going, are people going to go support him and go with the 49ers? Or are they going to remain to be Seahawks? Like, what does it mean to be a fan of a team? Are you talking about the people? Because the team is just a franchise. It's not that's been a huge debate actually, because the Seattle Sonics are now a defunct basketball team, right. But the history has gone with them, the team when they were sold. So there's this whole issue of, well, then what is the team? Like what are we talking about? Are we just talking about a very kind of superficial identity, as opposed to identifying a ritual that evokes identity on something that's deeper and
right.
It conveys your values, your beliefs, what you think is important in life. And the ritual, like you were saying, it needs to have meaning. Like it has to be for a purpose other than just itself. And I think that's what happened with rituals, is that people forgot or stopped emphasizing why they were there. It was just I think that there was an era especially in the United States, of conformity, where they were doing things that they should be doing. They just weren't explaining why it was important, and they weren't passing on the purpose of those. So people just said, okay, well, if people can't give me an excuse or a reason, a justification for why they should exist, then let's just get rid of them. Let's not do them anymore. Right. Well, now we're feeling the effects of that and trying to come up with explanations for why stuff is going on. And then but nobody wants to look back and say, well, maybe they were right for the wrong reasons. You know, sort of like when people are always telling you to do something, no, do as I say, not as I do. Well, sometimes they are right. They're just not practicing it. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do what they're saying. They're just not living it out in their own life. And I think that that's an opportunity for people to also socialize in person, in real life, rather than online. That's one way to do it, is by coming up with a ritual. And people get confused. They'll think it's almost like a religious thing, like I was saying, but it doesn't have to be. You can make it if you want it to be, but you can also have it for something else, where it's symbolizing relationships that you've built, where people within the group are going to understand it because they've gone through something with you, or they've done something, you went through a hardship, or you worked on a project. For example, completing some sort of a project, and you have a ritual to kind of close that and celebrate. I see that as an opportunity. They're talking about in the workplace, the idea of doing rituals. Yeah, if you have a ritual where people who worked on the project together celebrate, and there's some sort of, not like official ceremony, but just something that brings satisfaction and and recognizes that there's been a collective experience on that matter.
Yeah, I fully agree. I found a picture, and I was replacing the cedar siding on the front of my house, and since we've had steel siding put on the house and all of that, but this was when we first moved in. So I was in my late 20s, and back then part of it was, I did some of this stuff because nobody said I couldn't either. So I just figured it out, and it's amazing. Like I made a door, and I made drawers, and I made other things in drywall and stuff just that I figured out that today I just don't do. But I'm looking at this one picture, and I remember that I kind of redesigned the front of it a little bit without, and I just did it. I just kind of figured it out on the way that this entrance would be to the garage. But I remember, though, the picture, I was in the last stage, and I was putting up the last trim molding, and I wanted my wife to come out and to take a picture. And then I was going to, take this picture and share it with my parents and stuff. But this picture, was basically then, the ritual kind of went with it of me sharing this with some other people and talking about it. And it was a kind of this closure moment. And so let's kind of wrap up with, this has been absolutely intriguing. Minimalism. I know you've talked about minimalism, and that is a wide range of discussion on what minimalism means to different, people. So what does it mean to you? And I'm going to just, put this out of is it evolving for you? Is it something like that you are more into and now not is into? How has it been perceived by people around you, both positively and if negatively? And do you find it liberating? Do you find it constraining? Kind of go through that with me.
Yeah. So before I bought my house, I was renting out a bedroom and at someone's house. And before that, I was living in a little studio apartment in my hometown, which was very, very, very small. It was a bedroom with a kitchen. And then I went into this house. So I've been spending this process after having gotten rid of so much stuff to just minimize and get down to having as few things as possible. I'm now having to buy stuff or get more books. I got rid of hundreds of books that I had where I'd bought them for really cheap from dime bookstores or whatever, or Goodwill. And my experience over the years with minimalism is that it's like so many other things, there needs to be a balance, because on one hand, there's things that you're going to need and you don't want to have to go to the store every time you need it. So having ability to go just to your garage or to your shed or to somewhere when you need a tool, when you need something, but you need space to store that stuff in. It's a question of, does it serve a utility or a purpose that is worth having it around? But I also think that I'm a minimalist compared to most people who just collect a lot of stuff. And
right.
I think that it's all a question of, do you feel like you need something in order to be happy? And that's an issue that I've been thinking about as I'm trying to fill up my house with stuff. Do I need this? And if I don't, well, then when I have spare money and I have the opportunity to get it, I'll get it. But my house was pretty sparse. Now I've been collecting furniture so that people can actually sit when they come to visit, and they got the table and all that. But I still appreciate it. It's really a question of, if you're going to be a homeowner, your minimalism is going to look different. But if you are going to do kind of like what Aaron Clary talks about in his book, Reconnaissance Man, I know it's about going around traveling. He recommends obviously not having the route where you own as few things as possible. You just want to have your backpack and your socks and your laptop and not have that stuff constrain you, because that is the reality, is your stuff will constrain you. He also made a really good point, I'll think I'll add. You pay for things thrice: when you buy it, when you store it, and when you move it. So the fewer things you have
right.
are going to reduce that kind of stuff. So I'm still trying to figure that all out, but it's definitely, my mind has changed a little bit on it. I used to be very hardcore minimalist, just want as few things as possible. But now that I'm a homeowner and I'm settling down a little bit for the long term, I I'm adopting a new mindset on that. So it's all about where somebody is at in their life. Do they want to have a house? Do they just want to rent out an apartment and bare minimum, and then they go out and their life is centered on what's outside of their residence? So those are questions that they'll want to ask before moving forward with trying to decide to what extent they want to be a minimalist.
So how about your friends? I mean, have they said to you, "Oh, come on, TJ, like that would be great for the 65-inch TV, or this would be whatever," or
Ironically enough, I have a friend of mine who is the biggest minimalist I've ever met. He has the fewest things of anybody I've ever known. So he said, "Can you help me move?" One day we went into his bedroom and he had like 3 boxes and his bed. And that was about it. He's just
wow.
He lives in one of those micro studios where it's just the bedroom.
Yeah.
So he's achieved it. And I was trying to aspire to be that, but I also like having my books. I like having that traditional study and all that. And but people haven't really given me too much of a hard time about that. Interestingly enough, I'm also not very evangelical about my minimalism. I'm more of if it works for me, great, and if other people want to ask about it, I'll certainly tell them, but I'm not going to go around and say.
How about that? How about the flip side? Have people come to you and kind of emulating and saying, "Wow, TJ, like this is great. Like I see that you're out, you're doing things, and you're in shape, and how did you do it? How tell me a little bit, because I'm not there and I'd like to learn more about it."
I think that is a good question, because for me it was very an organic experiment. Me just trying to figure stuff out and looking at whether it worked or not for me, and where they're trying to go out in life. It really depends on what they're wanting to accomplish. If they want to start doing more hiking, if they want to start doing other stuff. I think the caveat is you might have to give up stuff. You might have to. So because I do so much of these things, there are other things I don't have time to do, and that's okay. But I'm acknowledging that I'm not going to be able to do those things. And if I want to do more of that, I'm going to have to give up elsewhere. You can't be everywhere. You can't do everything. You can't have it all. And I think for a lot of people, there's this mindset that you can do everything at the same time. I don't know if it's the multitasking era that we live in, but if you want to, for example, if you want to get stronger and get in shape, there's things that you're going to have to do as far as routine. You're going to need to go to the gym every day. You're going to need to think about what you eat and, not going out to eat maybe or whatever that is. And so it really depends on where somebody's at. But I would say, though, I've gotten mostly positive feedback. People tell me to keep, I was talking about I was going to cut down on social media stuff, and people go, "No, please keep posting your stuff on Facebook," because people, they use the term Facebook stalking. So they read my stuff, they don't comment or like it or whatever, but they like seeing it. Like my Instagram stuff from my hikes, because a lot of people, I understand if you're married and you got kids, you're not going to have as much time to do that sort of stuff. So when there are husbands and fathers who are able to do a lot of that stuff, I'm amazed, because I have hardly enough time to do the stuff I do now, and I have no constraints in that area. So I'm just want to say to those the husbands and fathers are able to do for example, what you're doing, I'm really impressed.
Well, thanks. I took up the podcast about 1.5 years ago, just as an expressive means, and I wanted to learn the technology, and it has brought me in contact with tremendous people from, Sean Dickers, who has designed video games, all the way to Danny Woodburn, who was on 7 episodes of Seinfeld, and then Paul Rapp, head of military medicine, and so I have a conversation with him, and he's working with the White House, and Paul's been on so many Nova and PBS type specials, and just down to earth. I mean, just great people, and someone contacted me, Hector Solis, who's become a good friend of when I first started out, and said, "I can help you with your audio, because here's some things that you're not, doing, you just don't know about yet, that you should do for podcasting." But it's helped me to learn about different topics, to stay current, and I enjoy it. And all I do is I listen to podcasts largely, during the week. Well, I read 2, but I'll probably listen to 10, 12 hours. So TJ, I'll listen to you, to Aaron, the Sustainable Living podcast, Gavin McInnes, and a few others. I just kind of like to get off my lawn. I think it's kind of funny, and we're 1 year apart so a lot of the things that he talks about are things in age that I can relate to. But it's funny. We talk about Aaron. And Aaron will post photos on Twitter, and it'll be today's office, and it'll be just this incredible, scenic venue where he's driven out on his motorcycle, and he stops, and he's just, taking a picture. But, he's achieved that because in his mid-30s, he made a decision to exit banking, and then, worked hard as a security guard. And these are all things that, that anybody would learn through listening through his podcast, and teaching ballroom dancing, and just being, learning how to fix his motorcycle and his, used Kia vehicles, and then being freed from debt and being able to do things and travel and build these friendships. So I really admire that. And I'm looking forward to the summer. Aaron and I are going to do some golfing up in his area. So yeah, we are going to find the absolute best bargain deal, when the 3:30 in the morning tee off time or whatever it is.
He's not getting up that early. No, he'll stay up that late.
He'll stay up that late. So it might be like, we might get the last one before he goes to bed. So yeah, I like, I like the fact that he stayed true to his word of stepping aside and really saying, and you mentioned this too in your review of his book, Poor Richard's Retirement, of saying, when somebody passes on, and you mourn them, what you're really mourning, per Aaron, is that you didn't spend more time with that person when they were alive. You were prioritizing other things. And maybe, am I correct in what I'm saying? I think that you had said that.
Yeah, that was probably, I think, one of the best things he wrote in that book was that people, I've always understood this. I didn't know how to articulate it to people, but everybody is in America today, for the most part, work a lot, and there's a lot of emphasis on just being busy. People are always telling me that they're busy, and the thing is, time doesn't turn back, and you don't get to revisit the past. I think that's one of the harmful things of time travel movies, is it gives people this false hope that they can maybe go back and change something or really relive something. But yeah, when somebody dies, you realize anything you wanted to say to them, anything you wanted to do with them, anything that you wanted that relationship to be is never going to be in this life. And I think that's when people begin to realize the permanence of death, and especially in a society where death is really removed from everyday life, as opposed to maybe back in the Middle Ages when death was very much understood like it's going to happen, and right. It's a part of it affects everybody. The old, the young can die, and so my thought is I want to spend time with people because I don't take anything with me when I die. My possessions are gonna. I think that's something that I would always point out to people, is that they have all this stuff, but what is the difference between a person who dies penniless and homeless and a person who dies with tons of stuff? Now, maybe their life experience was better, but that's where it needs to count, not how much stuff did you have when you passed away that people are going to fight over when you die, as opposed to when you die, are people going to look at you and say, feel that there was a fulfilled relationship, that it was what it was meant to be, or that it was what it became what it had the potential to become. And people should always take opportunities to spend time with people that they care about, or their friends or family, rather than saying, I'm too busy. I think that's a phrase that we need to be careful about using. And are we really too busy, or are we just not prioritizing properly?
Yeah, I agree, and that's where, right now, always, but Aaron is in well, he's coming back from the southern part of the United States, but he prioritized people. So he's visiting, and he'll say people like Denver Ben. I don't know who these people are, but I mean all of these people that he has met and befriended, and then they go out and they do things. And especially he enjoys hiking. But I mean, these are all things of when he eventually passes on, or is on his deathbed, he's going to look back and say, I did all of those things, and I'm glad that I did them. One of my friends, her mom had died in the hospital, and I remember she said to me, after my mom died, the thing that stood out the most is I looked over, and on the bedstand was my mom's purse. And I just thought, well, she's dead. The purse is there. It didn't go with her. Anything inside the purse. And just kind of this weird, you're here and then you're not. And I've acquired a number of tools over the years just of relatives who have passed on, like my great-grandfather and grandfather. And so some of these things I take out, and the ones that aren't modern, the tools that are maybe like from, the 1860s, 1870s, where it's the hand drill and everything like that, and the hand plane. I'm like, this stuff is just amazing to touch and to hold and to study of how this was used, and the fact that it's still very vibrant today. So that I keep for that purpose. But otherwise, it's just this collection of screwdrivers. And my neighbor, he had a garage sale, and he was bundling all of these toolboxes up, and he's like, Dave, I've just... people have died in the family. It's a big family, so I inherited tools, and I already have what I need, and so I'm just trying to get rid of these things. And I remember I was running the track late at night, and my phone buzzed, and my friend Dan, who I had worked with early in my career, who was my age, had leukemia, and I was kept up to date by both Dan and sometimes he couldn't type, his wife would type, and he had taken up photography toward the end of his life because it really was kind of the only thing he could still do outside. And this very vibrant, and unfortunately, just the disease had taken him down. And I remember, visiting and having a great time. And I was running, and my phone buzzed late at night, and I looked, and it was like a message from his wife, and I was like, oh, I just knew, and yep, it's like Dan, just passed away, and he had made peace. But I mean, you're right. There are so many things that just what you can have things, or you can have experiences, and you talk about experiences, and you've done experiences. And that's where I hope people who listen to you, who read your material, that they think about experiences first and possessions and items second. And that's just not the way that it is typically done today. And it was I had my taxes done yesterday, and we'll wrap this up, but I had my taxes done, and my tax guy, I'm getting kind of retirement planning, not there yet, but and he said, do you have anything like really big planned for the future? I said, well, we've saved for the girls, but I just kind of paused, and I said, well, the shirt that I had on, I said, I've probably had this thing for like 12 years. It's, like an outdoor hiking shirt. And then I had my Navy pea coat, which gets re-sewn every time that needs a little bit. It goes to the dry cleaner. And then, I said, that thing is, and it'll last forever. I said, so that's just that. But I said, my car is 11 years old, but I maintain it like great. And we put it in the garage every night. And, I said, we might do, like a Gettysburg or something like that. But I said, we're not buying a second home, and we're not buying a, high-speed boat or anything like that. I said, if I don't, and he said, you're in great shape then, like you're in great shape. And, I said, yeah. And I want to do, so that's the thing. I mean, if I can get home and I can do the sledding with my daughters, or Friday night, my second grader had a school sock hop. So, took her to the sock hop, and was up in the bleachers with the other parents, but, had fun. A little bit of talking with the other parents, but she's out there with the other kids and doing the sock hop. And then afterwards, hey, it looked like you had a lot of fun, and when your friend and you were doing whatever during the Macarena and things like that. So, so I appreciate that you are producing the content, you're putting the time into it, because I really enjoy it, TJ. And it's,
Oh, thanks.
I haven't found, I guess I haven't found anything quite like what you bring. And I'm very interested in the books. And then, I mean, as I shared with Aaron, I said, I'm just excited because, I mean, it's like another person has come forward who values experiences and sees a link to history, like where you're in the 1930s and where we were and where we are, and not just like, hey, today's like my video on how, my top 5 video on how to do whatever, to get the most YouTube subscribers, or my challenge of foods that
Right.
that can you style your hair with mashed potatoes or whatever. I mean, all these goofy things that are out there, this stuff. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, well, the JoJo Juice, what was it? That one actor, she had something, but she had like millions of YouTube followers, and she would just go on and she'd pour like either cranberry juice or whatever. That was her whole thing. She'd go in a shower and just stand there and just pour this stuff, and her mom recorded it. But then she's on some Nickelodeon show now or something, the JoJo Challenge or whatever. I'm like, well, that's crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, so can you give us your website again and kind of what you're working on, and go through the books one more time?
Yeah, so my website is tjmartinell.com, and the 2 books that you can find on Amazon are The Stringers and The Informers. And then the 3rd book that I'm planning to release next month is called Men Who Walk Alone. That's the one set in the 1930s, bit of a whodunit, pulp noir type genre.
And then, with your books, what drives you to do those and to complete those? I mean, I know a lot of people, including myself. I had a book contract. I still have a book contract with an advance that I had the company hold in escrow. It was more of a technical book on 9/11 and the rescue of 500,000 people from Battery Park. But, I wrote a few hundred pages of it, and then I just kind of stalled. And then so what was the motivation for you to finish it, do another one, and now you got your 3rd book?
I think I like doing content creation. I like creating things, and I like the ability to create characters that I want to see. That's what got me into writing in the first place. I was watching a TV show where I just did not like the characters. I felt like there wasn't any stories that were really conveying my values and the type of men that I wanted to see. And so I decided to write the books. Actually, Men Who Walk Alone was one of the first books I ever wrote. It's just gone through so many revisions over the years. And what drives me is just wanting to tell those stories and have it actually be completed. And I think I haven't done as much writing recently because I've been doing so many other things, but I'm definitely planning on doing more in the future. But I guess it's just motivation of just wanting to do something and take action and not sit there and consume the content or I guess part of it is I can't complain about something and not do anything. It really bothers me. I just did that on my podcast about people who complain about what they see but don't ever do anything about it one way or another. Maybe they don't like what they've written in their newspaper. Maybe they don't like what they're seeing around the country or in their community. So what are you going to do? And I didn't like what I was seeing in literature, so I decided to make my own.
Yeah.
I guess that's the best way to do it. And I feel like that's what a lot of people should do is if you don't like what's out there, try and find a way to create your own. And I think there's also fulfillment in making something as opposed to just buying it from someone else.
Wow. Well, I admire that because I know personally the amount of time that goes into that. And
Yeah.
I mean, you've published, I haven't published yet. So, well, TJ, I want to extend a great appreciation for your time on the Safety Doc podcast. And, we talked about agency and purpose, routine and ritual, and also just encouraging people to think about activities and experiences versus, accumulating things and or maybe those kind of false collectivism type things that people might, get into. Again, if I'm buying 5 jerseys with other people's names on the back, what am I really accomplishing, by that versus, if I learn some sport on my own, or even, go out and watch my local, like a lot of these towns not too far from us, they have a minor league team, like the very early entry team, but it's like college kids from all over, and you can pay like $5 and go in, and it's just super fun to watch. And then at the end, you can actually go down and talk with some of the players and stuff like that, and the people around you. So, things like that. So I think we brought a lot of discussion toward people in that thing too of experiencing life, and not having that 8th grade class trip where people are shutting it down. And if it does get shut down, to have a conversation. Well, let's open that up.
Yeah.
At some point in the future, TJ, I'd like to have you back and to have you explain your work with the 10th Amendment writings that you've been doing.
Yeah, the 10th Amendment Center.
The 10th, and because for just for people that aren't aware, the 10th Amendment, and help you clarify this if I'm wrong, but the 10th Amendment basically states that any rights that aren't held by the federal government go to the state, and if the state doesn't take those rights, that they default them to the individual people. And I think that is so lost today that people just don't even think about that. That is, they completely feel that everything has been federalized, probably, maybe, that there is some states, but, and I think we're seeing states start to stand up and to exert some state control, but we really never hear, though, of what is left back for, the local, the individual.
Yeah.
And there is quite a bit, and I was able to pull off in some of my research that's out there that people just have no idea about. So I think that's fascinating, and something, again, we just don't hear enough about. So
yeah, I'd love to talk about it sometime.
All right. Well, sir, thank you so much for being on the show, and I appreciate all of your work. I am going to continue to listen to the TJ Martinell podcast. I do have, every time there's a new one that comes out, you're on SoundCloud, and so anybody that wants to find you can also go into SoundCloud and subscribe and download through SoundCloud and be able to, or to stream, or to play. They have a really nice interface on SoundCloud. I used to be with them. I went to Podbean, so because Aaron is on SoundCloud. Aaron Clary's over there. He's one of the mainstays on SoundCloud. So thank you again, TJ, and I'll be interested in your upcoming release, and I've got to get into Amazon and probably use Aaron Clary's Amazon affiliate link to purchase your book, so Aaron gets the 7% commission. So it's a win-win-win.
It's win for all of us.
All right, TJ, thank you so much.
All right, thanks, David.